Okay, it is 8:30 p.m. It is um, Monday, March the 2nd, and welcome to week four of drugs and crime. And my name is Richard Wright, and I'm going to go on and get started here and give you the details of this week's assignments. Okay, let's take a look at again. You'll see 1, 2, and 3 lectures are here. Week 4 will be here today. Then we'll have 2 more to go after this week. Okay, so let's take a look at the announcement for this week. Okay, this week we'll deal with drug-related criminal activity law enforcement perspective will be presented. And to prepare for this assignment, we're going to have you to read Chapter 6 and 7 of Drugs and Crime and Justice, which I sent to you. Combating Drug Trafficking Organizations, or DTOs they're called, and law enforcement response to the heroin epidemic. And then we're going to remind you that your discussion assignment for this week, forfeiture, the initial post is due tonight or tomorrow night, which is the 3rd, and that the reply post is due Saturday. And I remind you to reply to as many posts as you possibly can. Finally, complete the course project, heroin and opioids, law enforcement perspective, and then complete the quiz. And this is all due by this Saturday, or this Sunday, I should say, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And then complete the mid-quarter survey that's included, and then you know what my motto is all about. So let's go and let's take a look quickly at the course calendar. And you can see we're in March. You can see that the live lecture is taking place now. You can see that the reading assignment is also in here. The initial post due tomorrow night. Reply post Saturday night. And then Sunday night, your course project, and then your quiz, and then your key phrase. You can see that starting with next week, we have 1 more week that'll be left after that. And you'll see that the course ends on the 20th. On the 20th, which is a week, 2 weeks from this Friday. So the course is just about winding down. So that's why I encourage you. Now, you should be aware that as of now, assignments for weeks 1 to 3 would not be permitted. I see some students have tried to submit the key phrase from previous weeks. You can't do that. You're not going to get points because the assignments that I will allow and still deduct points are the written assignments, not the discussion posts, just the written assignment, okay? And so as a result, those of you who tried to submit the key phrase is going back looking at the lectures from weeks 1, 2, and 3. It's not going to help you because you're beyond the period for those, okay? So let's close this down and let's go right into week 4. Again, I remind you about the Drugs and Crime course guide that will help you with your assignments. Okay, so this is a minimum of 3 pages, same as other assignments. And then these are the topics that you need to cover in your papers. 3 credible resources, not counting your textbook. I would usually encourage students not to even try to use their textbook for the written assignments. And do not use Wikipedia. And then once again, it reminds you about the Drugs and Crime Course Guide that I mentioned before. All papers are submitted in Word document. So let's take a look at the rubric. You see the written assignment is due this Sunday the 8th. And then to get your 40 points, these are the topics that I just mentioned to you from those bullet points that have to be included in your paper to get all 30 points. And you will lose points if your paper doesn't satisfy the 3-page minimum requirement. You will also lose points if you don't have your 3 credible, reliable resources as well. So it's very, 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 very important for you to have them. And then, of course, your APA requirements as well. You know that from beginning. Okay, so that's it for your written assignment. And then you come back here, your discussion, forfeiture, and your initial post, of course, is due tomorrow night. Then your reply post is due on Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard. Your quiz set for 30 minutes. You should not be surprised at how many questions there are. Usually it's an average of a question per minute, and you need to take care and get these things done. Okay, and then it reminds you here that about the test and 30 minutes, and that it's due on the 8th. Once you start it, you can't stop it. Okay? Then, of course, you already know your key phrase or word that I give you at the end of or during this session. Sometimes it's at the end, and sometimes it's before that. You may not realize it, but I talk about it quite a bit. So, what are we going to talk about tonight? We're going to talk about drug cartels, manufacturing, trafficking, and how drugs are smuggled, current law enforcement policies focusing on drug trafficking organizations, or DTOs as they're called. And then we're going to deal with some of the state and federal laws that target the manufacture, transportation, and sale of drugs and criminal activity by gangs and organized crime syndicates. We're going to discuss the impact of interdiction policies on the criminal justice system, and then what the law enforcement agencies are doing in response to the heroin epidemic, and it is an epidemic. You should be aware of that. We next week will talk about a particular approach that has been taken in some jurisdictions like Illinois, and then I will share with you a book that was written by a person who came to see us students a few years ago at Rasmussen College. So let's talk about what's happening. We already have talked about the problem with the war on drugs, the fact that it really is problematic, In other words, the more laws that are passed and the things that the government at all levels is trying to do uh, seems to not stem the tide. Increasing the sentences doesn't seem to have a deterrent effect. And so now we're going to explain to you how the organizations operate. You should be aware, as the Freakonomics video that we did last week explained how gangs deal with the trafficking of cocaine, of crack cocaine. You should be aware that it is big business. It is big money, and that it's international in nature. Countries such as Mexico and China are supplying and distributing narcotics in all over the world, and they try to maximize their profits like any other business. Try to get what we call a good ROI, or return on their investments. And the Chinese are one of the large wholesalers and distributors of opium and heroin in the United States. A lot of people are surprised to hear that. They thought it was Mexico, but yes, they do have a big portion of it. But the drug trafficking organizations from China are huge, and a lot of people don't even know it. Did you not know that some of the plates, cups that come into the United States from China actually are made up of drugs? And a lot of people don't know it. The outer shell appears to be regular silverware, or rather plates, bowls, cups, saucers, but they are actually another way of getting drugs into this country. And a lot of manufacturers are putting additives like fentanyl and caffeinated, and it's then later sold on the street. So they cut the drug to stretch it out to be able to make it a bigger profit on it. So what are we talking about? Fentanyl is a synthetic drug and a prescription drug prescribed by physicians in the United States. Caffeinated is a sedative used for sedating elephants and other large animals, tigers, lions, bears, and as an illicit drug, it says that the purity of heroin is not regulated, and people ingest this stuff and have overdosed because they're not aware of the other substances. So you don't get the heroin pure, you get it cut with these types of additives that make it even more harmful to the body. I believe if it was 100%, that would also be harmful because of the quantity of it. And so the point of the matter is that there are so many things that people don't take into consideration when they use opioid and heroin in their body. There's an article here that we're not going to talk about, the Chinese connections fueling America's fentanyl crisis. You'll learn a whole lot more, and how it operates in the United States and in Canada. Take time to read that. But needless to say, let me continue with my discussion about the cartels. So the cartels are entities well organized, with soldiers, with individuals who are out on the streets, who are distributing these drugs. They have manufacturers, and it works just like any other company that provides a product. It is very well organized. They keep records of financial profits as well. And so it is a very serious, serious grip on the United States and Canada, and that, as I said, the law enforcement agencies are having a lot of trouble. And one of the sources of distribution that these cartels use are our gangs. That was mentioned last week, how they do crack cocaine. Well, you have a similar type of activity that takes place with the distribution of opioids and heroin. So it talks about here the money is either laundered as cash, smuggled back to Mexico, and used to pay corrupt officials, government officials in the federal United States as well as Mexican, to allow this stuff to come through. It is a greed for that dollar, and it's interesting. I talked about this yesterday in church about the greed that people would do anything sometimes for money, include selling, distributing, or allowing drugs to go through. Even those who make very good money to supplement their income, because it's cash and it's usually considered as tax-free. And so these individuals who are bought off, they turn their head, look the other way, and they will deal with the other individuals who are not paying them. I remember when I was the village attorney in Ford Heights, the chief of police would tip off the drug dealers that were paying him, he was taking kickbacks from, as to when raids were going to take place. But the opposition, or those who would not pay him, they would get raided. And so the cartels operate the same way on a larger scale. And also, they battle each other. They just like gangs do, just like organized crime does in itself, for distribution rights and for territory to be able to sell the drugs in the United States. So the majors, just here's a few of them. The major cartels consist of the Sinaloa cartel, the Jesco New Generation cartel, the Juarez cartel, the Gulf cartel, the Los Zetas cartel, the La family, which means the family, and the Beltran labor organization. Well, these are just the names of some of the major DTOs, drug trafficking organizations. And the violence that takes place in many areas, you can tell when it's a drug killing because there's usually execution style killing. And so the violence, as it says, that was once reserved just for turf wars among the cartels has increased and directed toward the government, political candidates, and other individuals, including even the news media. So the DEA enters into the picture and is the primary agency in our country that is responsible for fighting the drug cartels. And they have agents stationed throughout the world in various countries, and they are conducting investigations on a regular basis and trying to infiltrate DTOs on a daily basis, and trying to deal with those that cross the border from Mexico, and they have task force where some of the people who are not subject to corruption, kind of like the untouchables that you may become familiar with from the Prohibition period, and they work together and pool the resources to deal with combating drug traffickers. And those individuals are not subject to being brought out in most cases. But be aware, as I suggest constantly to my students, I says, don't get yourself caught up in unethical, illegal practices just for money, because it will end up causing you your life, your family's lives, and possibly even your own careers, and land you in jail. You guys have heard of El Chapo. El Chapo, Juan, I think his name is Guzman, but El Chapo just recently sentenced to long periods of time, and he's being tried in other organizations, in other jurisdictions in the United States. I think he was found guilty in New York, but I think there's a case coming up in California. Anyway, to keep him in. However, be aware that what happens is that the organization then is handed down to his children or the children or to other family members to keep the business going, just like other people do in organized businesses, legalized businesses. So not only you have a DEA involved, but you have the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearm and Explosives dealing with this, because there's violence constantly, as I stated, involved. Now, the ATF is key in infiltrating and tracing firearms and weapons. You should be aware that where there is a DTO, there's also going to be a lot of violence. There's also going to be weaponry and firearms involved as well. And finally, the result of 2011, the Department of Homeland Security came about because of the attacks that took place September the 11th. And so now the Department of Homeland Security is dealing with the Border Patrol and trying to plug up the entry. Now, you should be aware that illegal drugs do not have anything to do with a wall, contrary to what the president has said. You haven't heard much about it lately, though, because of the election taking place that's imminent. But in the months prior to, you constantly heard about the wall. And the deflection away from the real issue is that these individuals, when they would bring in these drugs, are not coming over the wall. They were not those people that are seeking to come over the wall for a new life. These were people who were what we call mules, who are people who carry the drugs, who attempt to bring the drugs in fake, they have cars that have fake gas tanks, fake engines, other fake compartments in cars, even the seats. The material sometimes is made out of the drug. And you'll find that the stuffing that's under the seats, like the cotton that usually you'll find, or the padding, contain drugs. And their attempts to smuggle these drugs in. There are some instances where individuals themselves swallow these drugs in balloons and get them in their system. And then when they get into the country, they give them a laxative And yes, they go to the washroom and it comes out very, very, very bad. But what often happens is that these individuals will find that the balloon will rupture, and then those individuals will die of overdoses. So these are just some of the techniques that the Border Patrol people, the Department of Homeland Security uh, deal with in terms of illegal shipments of narcotics that cross the border. The Border Patrol agents, these are the people who check the borders, inspect vehicles, and patrol borders, while other federal agents conduct what we call large-scale, long-term investigations. So once you get into the country here, then you're dealing with the local, starting with the state department, state police departments, and other local level investigators that deal with drug trafficking, where people go undercover and attempt to make buys or attempt to sell drugs in order to attract individuals. And so it's a collaborative operation from the federal, the state, to municipal that's operating, and you can see some of these things if you take time to look at this map. And then you can see here that where the various offices are of the organizations that deal with the distribution of these drugs all across the United States. Okay, so it is a very serious issue, and so now we conclude by talking about what is law enforcement doing to respond to this heroin epidemic that the DTOs have caused in our country. And so obviously, as I said, the war on drugs is a problem. And so now we are at a point with heroin being a real serious problem in our country. In fact, we have what we call a heroin epidemic going on right now. And the reason why it became an epidemic seriously is not because it was happening in urban areas, but it started happening in rural areas. It started happening in areas where there were wealthy people, where there were people of not just working class, but executives. I'm talking about everybody has family members or people that they know that have been affected by heroin. And there has been a very, very serious problem with overdoses of heroin. And so now what has happened is that because, as I said earlier, that this heroin is cut with fentanyl, a prescription pill killer, synthetic, that's manufactured, and then opioid pain medication. So people are taking pain medication, ibuprofen. There are so many different ones where the individuals reach the point that they rely on them. And you're going to see in a few weeks as we conclude this course in weeks 5 and particularly in week 6, some of the effects that this has on individuals. And so the stuff that I talked about earlier, that's lacing this heroin, caffeine, as I said, a sedative for controlling large animals, wild animals, and so forth. And so what happens is individuals who are heroin addicts, people whose bodies have oftentimes gone from using painkillers, have elevated to the point of using heroin. And the heroin oftentimes enters the body through an injection. And again, like I said, there's no regulation of it. There's no purity of it. And so these products, it says, have such a powerful sedative effect that it results in people ODing, affects their breathing, and respiration is slowed, stopped, and sometimes result in death. And because of this, law enforcement has reached the stage where now a very powerful method for dealing with this has come about, that law enforcement agencies on a large scale are able to, and this is well-to-do law enforcement agencies, and then many the federal government is providing grants and monies to provide what is needed to arrest or stop these overdoses, or to minimize them. It's called Narcan. Narcan is one brand of what we call Naloxone, a prescription drug that is an antidote to opioid overdose. And what it does is the Naloxone or Narcan will reverse what is happening as a result of using these opioids. Because the effects of opioids, as I said, slow breathing and or stop the breathing entirely. And what this Naloxone does is it is like an antibody, and it affects the transportation of this drug in the body and stops it and reverses it and the overdose symptoms. However, it is a problem because of the fact that if you don't get to the parties on time, it's not going to make a difference. But it has cut into the drug. So you see now what is happening is law enforcement is being trained and taught, EMTs, emergency medical technicians, and other individuals, first responders, firefighters, are all learning how to work with Naloxone, and it says Naloxone works on overdoses of heroin and prescribed painkillers such as oxycodone, hydrocodone, and morphine. The key thing is things that people start to use to take away the pain in their body can result in them being hooked on heroin, and it works. Narcan, it is, again, a controlled substance, and it says that it requires authorization for possession and administration by first responders. And so these individuals are trained to do so. So they try to respond as quickly as possible to individuals who apparently have overdosed on these drugs. It says in most cases a protocol called a standing order can be issued for the entire department by a provider holding a license to write a prescription for the drug. The key thing is that it is expensive, but that I went to a seminar, and law enforcement agencies are now, as I said, getting monies from the federal government. Okay, and so you can learn more about how this works. The Food and Drug Administration has approved the use of Narcan as an antibody, and now it's reached the stage that you can do it the same way as you do nasal sprays, so it can be get into the body and used easily, other than shooting up a person with a needle, is by nasally using it. And you can learn more about that in this article that is in here. And also, law enforcement carry the Narcan as part of their arsenal to deal with the drug epidemic. Notice what they're doing is, again, they're trying to save lives of people, but as I already said before, probably the best method to really help people is to get people drug help. We're going to be talking about that next week in detail, and I'm going to give you right now a few minutes to take a look at this video, and I'm going to take off my headset. This is called Chasing the Dragon. This is a short version, but this is law enforcement's perspective on dealing with an epidemic. So I'm going to put this on for you. I'm going to take my video and stop it, but then you can see, pay attention to this. Listen.
Prescription pills have definitely become an increasing problem that we see. And not only involving the crimes to investigate actual prescription, but it involves other things too. People start doing other things when these things they need to get. I think that the first article that started it, kids with kids that are that's the way that started to say right out the pill that I think that's why first. The doctor to it later. Just the people that get them.
So you see, this is no joke. This is a very, very serious, 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 serious offense. And so you get a chance to, you need to understand. Let's see what the prosecutors are saying. Let's see what the concerning this very issue as well. Once individuals are brought in, what's here?
I've been working on these cases since 2002. It's been my passion. It's been my absolute passion. And even today, it's still hard for me to handle cases where somebody dies from this little pain pill, many that they take. And I could give you countless examples of people who have died from overdose of pain medication. A patient named Wright was addicted to oxycontin. And he called oxy for fun about it. And it just consumed every part of his life, every second of every minute of every hour of the day. He thought about getting another pill to feed his addiction. Unfortunately, and I have worked on cases, kids, teenagers, young adults, just like my kids. Whether they stay or not, medical schools. But at some point in life, they succumb to temptation. And for whatever reason, when someone brought them this little death is when they took them, they succumbed to took them. Took a couple more, and a couple more, and they became addicted. The emotional toll was inflicted on the family, loved ones, and close relatives of people who use these drugs. Cannot understand. Spiritually, emotionally, mentally, it affects them. Not just in a part, emotionally, but financially, because here's what I want to do. Parents, when kids need once more addicted, they will spend enormous amounts of money to put their person who's addicted in drug rehab. That's not cheap. That is not cheap. Now, I don't want to mention the individual's name, but I know of one family that spent $10,000, $20,000, and they didn't make a lot of money. They wrote this to put that alcohol in drug rehab. Who the hell am I? Others will see that their father or family is receiving treatment.
Okay, you have heard from and seen two perspectives of it, of how this whole thing works.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you've seen 3 different videos, 3 different perspectives. You've seen what law enforcement says. And by the way, Chasing the Dragon, the law enforcement perspective that you saw today, is not the one that is going to give all the details. We're going to actually have a chance to let you see this very long video during the final week of class, week 6, and you'll see what the movie that they were talking about that's prepared. But for the moment, you need to understand that law enforcement is recognizing that there is a serious problem. And so I'm going to give you the key phrase for tonight is opioid addiction. That's it. I'm not going to repeat it. So you're going to give me that phrase to get your points. But this course should help you to understand, as future law enforcement individuals, as future criminal justice professionals, how easy it is to get caught up in it, and you'll again discover that in a few weeks. I'm going to say good night to you. I will see you next week when we'll continue, and we have 2 more weeks left in this course, and this should make you never ever think you'll change your whole thinking about how the drugs operate. So I'm going to say good night and end this meeting.